Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Tuesday, February 4th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. California has enrolled a new statewide program to tackle mental illness. Why has enrollment in the program fallen short of expectations?
It's a combination of A, being designed in the first place to only address a smaller segment of the population, and B, it being a brand new program, I think, and people either not knowing or having to wait to see.
We look at the rollout of Care Court coming up later in the show, but first, these headlines. 2 men have been indicted on wire fraud and conspiracy charges related to the failed Fresno tech startup Bitwise Industries. Federal prosecutors said Monday that the 2 men were involved in a scheme to defraud investors. The men were identified as David Hardcastle of Fresno and Andrew Adler of Connecticut. The alleged fraud activity involved concealing the true financial position of Bitwise. Hardcastle and Adler are accused of providing altered loan documents to the investors. Those investors eventually faced significant losses when Bitwise CEOs declared bankruptcy. Former Congressman T.J. Cox formally pleaded guilty Monday to 2 charges of wire fraud. He's facing a prison sentence of up to 30 years and a $1 million fine. A judge will determine his sentence in June. The charges stem from allegations that Cox stole more than $1.5 million from clients in the form of payments, loans, and investments. A judge dropped 26 other charges in exchange for a guilty plea. Cox served 1 term in Congress from 2019 to 2021. Big water releases from 2 Central Valley dams are leaving farmers flummoxed. It's the result of an executive order from President Trump that's supposed to help fight wildfires in Los Angeles. But as KVPR's Joshua Yeager reports, the water is unlikely to reach its intended destination.
Joel Isaac could hardly believe the announcement.
It's our water. We need to make sure we have enough for our crop.
Isaac and his neighbors rely on water stored at Cahuilla and Success Lakes to irrigate their fields come spring.
We should keep it until we know we have some excess, but right now it looks like we're going to have a dry year.
The Army Corps of Engineers oversees the dams and says they're releasing the water to help with firefighting efforts in Southern California. But Los Angeles is separated from the Sierra Nevada by hundreds of miles and a 4,000-foot tall mountain pass, making the water transfer costly and impractical. For KVPR News, I'm Joshua Yeager in Bakersfield.
A lawsuit filed by community college professors in the Valley over diversity, equity, and inclusion policies has reached a conclusion. As KVPR's Rachel Livenall reports, a federal judge last week dismissed the case.
The lawsuit was filed more than a year ago by 6 professors at Madera, Clovis, and Fresno community colleges. It alleged that California community colleges' instructor evaluations on diversity, equity, and inclusion violated their academic freedoms. But U.S. District Judge Kirk Sheriff dismissed the case because there was no proof the regulations would be enforced against their will. The judge also found the regulations were not formally adopted in the faculty contracts, according to the Education News website EdSource. Sheriff recently dismissed a similar lawsuit involving a Bakersfield College professor. That one was dismissed because there was no actual DEI policies in place at the college. For KVPR News, I'm Rachel Livenall.
Looking for a way to support KVPR but can't write that big check at the moment? What about that old unwanted car in the driveway? Your vehicle donation could net hundreds of dollars for KVPR. It's easy. We'll tow it away free of charge, KVPR gets a check, and you'll get a receipt for your taxes. And we can take RVs, boats, and motorcycles too. Find out more at kvpr.org/cars or call 855-277-2346.
And now to our main story. Care Court is Governor Newsom's controversial plan to address California's homelessness crisis. The goal is to get people with severe mental illnesses and substance use disorders into treatment. While the statewide program was only just rolled out last December, a handful of counties launched pilot versions more than a year earlier. Among them was Stanislaus County, where the number of people enrolled fell short of projected goals. a trend echoed across other trial counties. So what does Care Court mean for the state's larger effort to address homelessness and mental health? I recently spoke with Marijke Rowland. She's a health equity reporter with our news partner, the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. Here Marijke is explaining who qualifies for Care Court.
Care Court, while sort of touted as another way to combat our state's ongoing homelessness crisis, really has a pretty narrow definition of who qualifies for it. So it's for people with schizophrenic disorders or on the psychotic disorder spectrum. So that's a pretty small sliver of people with mental health disorders. It's not for people with depression or anxiety or anything like that. You have to have one of those disorders. It has to be untreated. But again, your housing status has nothing to do with the criteria. So people can be housed, people can be unhoused. It's really to get people who aren't being treated right now for these specific disorders county-funded treatment.
And can you give us a brief overview of who's been in support of this program?
Yeah, so obviously this is a program that's been championed by Governor Gavin Newsom and the legislature. They passed it and it was signed in 2022. It has some support in the mental health world as well. Groups like the National Alliance on Mental Health of California have supported it. But there's also been people within the mental health profession who have pretty vigorously opposed the creation of Care Court.
And why have they opposed it? What's been their reasons for pushing back on it?
The way Care Court works is it's a voluntary program, though once you're in the program, you have to follow the agreements in either your agreement or plan. And if you don't, things can become less voluntary. So there's concern about loss of civil liberties. There's concern about if it goes to the very end stage of this process unsuccessfully, there could be conservatorship, which obviously greatly curtails civil liberties and other things like that. So people who are against it are concerned about both its cost, because it's an expensive program, its scope, because it has the potential to strip people of civil liberties, and just its overall effectiveness.
So fears it might be more coercive than portrayed.
Right.
In your reporting, you specifically focus on Stanislaus County, and as you mentioned, they were one of 7 counties that launched this program early in October of 2023. The program has officially launched statewide as of December. But looking at Stanislaus County, how have results looked there? Do we have an idea of how many people have been served or helped since it launched?
Yeah, so since it launched about a year before the rest of the state, Stanislaus County has had 67 petitions filed. Now, once a petition is filed, a judge determines whether the person meets the criteria. That's sort of the very first step, and whether they can proceed in the process. So of those, right now, about half were deemed eligible, and the people were interested in moving forward or able to move forward, and then the rest were not.
There were some state projections for how many petitions would be filed. Stanislaus County fell short of that projection by about 30%. Curious about your insight into why that would be. Is there a lack of awareness of this program? Were those goals really lofty? What are people saying?
Well, I think this points to some of the criticism of the program in the first place. The criteria for Care Court is relatively narrow. Schizophrenia or on psychotic disorders, they represent a really small percentage of the overall population. It's less than 1% nationally. So there's really only a sliver of the population that qualifies in the first place. Secondly, this is a brand new program. Anything that's new takes a while to get the information out there. Some people might even be waiting to see how it works. So it's a combination of A, being designed in the first place to only address a smaller segment of the population, and B, it being a brand new program, I think, and people either not knowing or having to wait to see.
In your story, you speak with a man, Richard Cardoza. He was the first person to successfully complete the program in Stanislaus County. What did you hear from him, and what did he find helpful in the program?
So, Richard is someone who has been unhoused for a while. He told me he hadn't had stable housing in, 2 decades. And so one of the most helpful things he told me about Care Court was that he was put into housing. People in Care Court get priority for housing and treatment through counties. In the bill, there are potential penalties for counties who don't provide people the treatment and care if they're eligible for Care Court. You can be in housing for a year, and you can voluntarily re-up again then for another year if you want. On the other flip side, if you're in a plan and you don't successfully complete in a year, you will then be placed in another year, either voluntarily or involuntarily, and you're just going to be put in another year. So there's sort of carrot and stick sides of this program.
Moving forward, how does CareCourt fit into California's approach to addressing mental health issues?
California in recent years has passed a number of pretty massive changes to our mental health policy, CareCourt being one of them. Proposition 1, which voters just approved last March, is another one, which has $6.5 billion in bonds to build largely institutional treatment, and then also greatly restructures how county mental health funding is allocated. Another one, which all California counties will be dealing with soon, is SB 43, which is a change to the conservatorship law. That sort of dovetails with CareCourt because the new changes in the conservatorship law sort of expand who can be placed in involuntary conservatorship. And that ranges from initial 72-hour 5150 holds to longer care and involuntary treatment. So there's a lot of changes coming down the pipeline in mental health, both for county programs and for people seeking mental health help. A lot of these have been sort of touted as ways to combat homelessness, though critics would say that it sort of stigmatizes those with mental health issues as the reason for our state's homelessness problem.
Has Governor Newsom weighed in on the progress of CareCourt? I know this was a really huge project he was pushing.
I haven't seen much comment from him since the pilot programs have finished. We might be seeing more now that all of the California counties have their own. Every county sets up their own CareCourt. So there are probably some differences between counties as well, how they administer it, how it's run. But it'll be an interesting first year to see, what sort of results. Some counties had way lower uptake of the program than anticipated. San Francisco only had 42 petitions filed all year, and they're a larger county and obviously a huge city. So it's interesting to see how it's been adopted in different areas.
Marijke Rowland, health equity reporter with our news partner, the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. Thanks for helping us break down this topic.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And that's today's show. If you have feedback or a story idea for the show, we would love to hear from you. Email podcast@kvpr.org. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden, Carrie Klein, and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.